I cannot believe it's been 7 years. We're going on our 7th year of being on History Hunters, and you might be asking yourself, why am I out here in the middle of a vineyard off to the side of a road in French Camp? French Camp Road is where I'm at, outside of Manteca, California. Well, it's because this is where Castle Elementary School was located back in the 1920s and 1930s. And there's quite a story. I didn't know that I was going to be doing this story, but I found out this week what happened here at this school in 1932. There was a school teacher here that had, let's say, administered a little corporal punishment to whatever unruly students, whacked him in the hand, and his father came back later and shot to death the teacher. I'm going to tell you the story. It's a crazy one, and we're going to visit the grave of that teacher on this episode of History Hunters, so join us. This is a very busy road, and hopefully the traffic will not drown me out, but I did some research, found out this is the area where the school was located. Now, it was removed sometime in the 1960s, I believe, so it's been quite a while, at least 60 years, and not a lot of people remember the school, but it was a brick school built in the 20s. It's very difficult to even locate exactly where it is, but I've been told it's right in this area. In fact, there's a map online that shows the defunct school that was in this area. Newspaper articles were stating that Mrs. Taylor was having to deal with the troublesome kids of Tom Kumas, a 39-year-old Greek immigrant and ranch hand who lived on nearby Austin Road. At 4:15 p.m. on April 20th, 1932, Taylor was at the chalkboard explaining math problems to some of her students. Kumas walked through the front entrance of the school and quickly found Taylor and started yelling at her about disciplining his son. Kumas had 2 students at the school, son John, who was 7, and daughter Helen, who was 9, who Mrs. Taylor said were unruly and caused problems for her. At lunchtime that same day, student John Kumas threw his lunch on the floor and Mrs. Taylor ordered him to pick it up. The boy threw a temper tantrum and screamed and swore at Mrs. Taylor. She then whacked his hand several times with a ruler. When Dad heard about the incident, it set him over the edge. He was already dealing with his wife being in the state mental hospital in Stockton, which was stressful to him. The shouting caused 74-year-old janitor William J. Deval to come running into the room, and when he got there, he saw Mr. Kumas pull out his weapon and fired 3 times at Mrs. Taylor, who dropped to the floor. He then shot Deval, who sustained a wound that was later treated at the San Joaquin General Hospital. The janitor's wife was also in the room, and when Mr. Kumas turned the gun on her, she hit the floor to escape the bullet. It was also reported that Kumas also shot at a student named Frances Fisher, but he missed her. Kumas immediately gathered up his children and fled in his sedan. He then dropped them off at the home of a friend before driving to a rural ranch in Salida, where he left his car and burned his sweater and trousers. He obtained new clothes from a man and forced him to drive to Manteca before he disappeared. California Governor James Rolfe offered a $500 reward for the arrest and conviction of Kumas. In July 1934, a New Jersey detective tracked Kumas down to his native Greece. He had escaped through Mexico by car to South America and made his way to Spain and then Greece. U.S. officials wanted to extradite him to stand trial in San Joaquin County, but Greece officials would not allow it. Instead, he faced trial in Greece and was convicted of murder in his native country and served 4.5 years for the murder. Fast forward to 1947. Kumas returned to San Joaquin County, presumably to see his children, and was arrested for murder. San Joaquin County wanted to prosecute Kumas, but in 1948, the California State Supreme Court ruled that he could not be tried because of the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment that states that a person cannot be convicted twice for the same crime. Now I'm going to take you up the road here, up French Camp Road, to show you the cemetery. It's Parkview Cemetery in Manteca, and we'll try to find the grave of the teacher who was shot here. Okay, now we are at Parkview Cemetery in French Camp. It's an old establishment that goes way back. Believe it or not, there were some French trappers and explorers here in the Central Valley of California. Prior to most white men entering the valley, I guess they were white men. So this cemetery is at the junction of French Camp Road and Highway 99, and it took me about 30 seconds to a minute to find the grave based on the picture that I saw on findagrave.com. And she's right over here. Olive Taylor, the teacher who was shot out at Castle School in 1932. Olive is right here. Like I said, it didn't take me very long to find it. There's the grave of Olive Bailey Taylor, 1882 to 1932. She was 50 years old. She was married. Very tragic that some deranged parent had to take her life. Right next to her is Mildred Taylor, their daughter. She was also a school teacher. And actually, she died the same year that her father did. So this is the widower of Mrs. Bailey Taylor, Ethan Taylor, 1873 to 1957. Had to go through the rest of his life, some 25 years without his wife. Of course, Mildred Taylor had to say goodbye to her mother way too early in life. I believe the inspiration that Mildred had to become the school teacher was a direct result of her mom being a teacher. You know, every time I hear about somebody dying on the job because of their occupation, whether it's working on an electric line, building a bridge, being a police officer or a firefighter, I think it's just absolutely horrible that people have to die doing their job. And to have a teacher lose their life is just almost unthinkable, but it's happened quite often. And it's happened at school shootings lately. Now, back in 1932, school shootings were very rare. I just think it's sad. This woman did not get to go home to her husband that night because of what some deranged father did as a result of his kids being probably appropriately disciplined for acting out of line. I've always believed that spankings are appropriate, not to an extreme, but certainly trying to keep kids in line and let them know you cross the line, there are consequences for it. We'd like to find the grave of Francis Fisher, who was the student that Mr. Kumis shot at, and Mr. Deval, the janitor that was shot. They are all buried in this section of the cemetery. Looks like this poor marker got hit quite bad. Marjorie Hill. Sorry about that, Marjorie. I've been out here quite a while looking for Mr. Deval's grave. This is the problem that we have. I mean, you can't even find anything here. Shoot.
Since I was having trouble finding graves, I headed off to the cemetery office for locations.
Maybe it's because I'm a guy, but I hate asking for directions.
While awaiting a staff member to dig into the records, I noticed cemetery incorporation papers framed on the wall detailing how the burial grounds were approved in 1918. A plaque outside on the ground detailed the veterans section was dedicated in 1917, complete with an era cannon. I was then drawn to some of the graves of servicemen who died very young. World War I losses included Captain Herbert Boyer of the 1st Division of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Percy Fisher of the Field Signal Battalion was killed on July 18, 1918. Lester Wielandt was killed at the age of 21 on September 29, 1918 in France. Cecil Thompson was also killed in France in 1918. Corporal John Yount died of a tumor at Camp Wadsworth in South Carolina. Other markers recall long obsolete units like the headstone of Private First Class Carl Southwick, who served in the 4th Balloon Squadron. World War II losses included Sergeant Theodore Swinge, who was killed during a June 6, 1943 cleanup operation on Attu. I came across the grave of 19-year-old Donald Rieger, who was a tail gunner on a flying fortress with the 8th Army Air Force, shot down over France on August 8, 1944. There was the grave of Joseph Pfister of the 451st Army Air Force Bomb Squadron, who died December 11, 1944. Then there was Louis Guy Greenwood, died 1941, and Francis Jackson Jr., who died January 10, 1945.
All right, now that I'm armed with my instructions, I will show you where Mr. Deval, William Deval, the 74-year-old janitor who was shot that day, he's buried right here, section C3, and he's by this tree. And there's the grave of William J. Deval, 1858 to 1943. Mr. Deval heard the commotion when Mr. Kumas went into the classroom and started yelling at the teacher, and so he ran in there to find out what was going on. After Mr. Kumas shot Mrs. Taylor, he took a shot at Mr. Deval. He sustained his wound, but he managed very well. He was taken to San Joaquin General Hospital where he was treated for his wounds. I thought it said 1884, but it's actually 1864, so this has to be his wife. Now, she was also in the classroom, and she was shot at, but she ducked and she missed a bullet, and Mr. Kumas ran out. He was done shooting. And it looks like Doris here was the daughter. She was born in 1890. She died in 1957. So how much you want to bet that Mr. Deval thought, some parents are irate and yelling at the teacher, nothing's going to happen here. He whips out a gun. I wonder what he thought. I've often wondered what people think when they see a gun pointed at them. Okay, so now I'm on the hunt for the grave of Frances Fisher, who was the 12-year-old student, the female student, who was shot at by Mr. Kumas. Can you imagine a guy shooting at an innocent grade school girl, 12 years old? Damn, he must have lost his mind. Some of these cemeteries, the older ones, just don't have good maps and things like that. So even the staff members kind of struggled with giving me the directions to this place, but I found it. It's right here. If something doesn't quite make sense, I'm pretty sure this is the grave. Frances Fisher, beloved wife, 1914 to 1954. Now, she was reported as a student, but if you could do the math, you can see that, well, I guess she would have been in her teen years, probably about 17. And I'm not sure why her name didn't change. I sure hope I have the right person, because typically when you marry somebody, you change the last name to your husband's last name. So this could have been the wrong person. But what are the odds? So it was about this time a year ago that I was in Turlock and I was visiting the grave of Charles Milhous. I was telling you that he is a second cousin of President Nixon and that his father Ezra was buried in Manteca. Well, here we are a year later, and I'm finally getting around to showing you where his dad, Ezra, is buried, President Nixon's uncle. They spent some time in Whittier, California. And ultimately, Ezra came up here to the Central Valley where he became a farmer, and I think he was a horse breeder as well. He was married in Tulare, and then he later moved up to the foothills around Grass Valley where he passed away. I think he passed away in a Nevada City hospital. But his grave is going to be pretty easy to find. It's this tree right here. If you go to the other side of the tree, I haven't been there yet, but I'm suspecting that it's going to be easy to find. So we're going to start by this tree, and there's the mausoleum in the background. And come over about 4 or 5 rows in this direction. And we're going to find the grave right over here. Ezra Charles Milhous. There he is. 1887 to 1970. Of course, you may know that President Nixon was inaugurated the first time in January 1969. Ezra was not able to attend the inauguration, which is kind of sad if you think about it. And over here, it says wife, Lima. She died in 1958. And we have pictures of both of them. Ezra bore a really strong resemblance to his famous nephew. Had the same profile nose. I was kind of shocked though when I came up here because I saw this name of Hannah and I thought, well, wait a minute, President's mom isn't buried here. No, this is Hannah Milhous Thomas, who was Ezra's daughter, beloved daughter, wife, and mother. She died in 2009, born in 1928. But Ezra was a native of Indiana. He moved to Southern California with his family, of course, the Whittier area. You know, President Nixon grew up in Whittier. He married his wife in Visalia in 1909. Ed Nixon, who was President Nixon's brother, stated that their uncle was a character and had a twinkle in his blue eyes. He was a ladies' man. He was chasing some skirts, probably. Now, probably part of the reason that Ezra was unable to go to the inauguration is he was half blind and he had some health issues. I think he was starting to develop some dementia. I'm not sure on that, but he made some headlines. It was in 1969. The news reported that he had wandered away from a Sacramento bus station, and they found him, I think, days later in some hotel, and he was taken to the hospital, and he was okay. Of course, I'm sure all of you remember that President Nixon's middle name is Milhous, Richard Milhous Nixon. It's not unusual for presidents to have a middle name for the other family names. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he was a grandson of Fitzgerald. And then we had George Herbert Walker Bush. Walker was his mother's name, so that's not unusual. But I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode as the sun's going down.
Wait, hold on. There's one more thing I want to show you before I wrap up this video.
I'm driving up French Camp Road, and this one house has always fascinated me. It's a two-story house. It's very decrepit looking, and over the years, oh gosh, in the 70s, I remember passing by here as a kid, and always wondered about who lived there and what the historical significance is. Why it's falling apart, nobody's doing anything about it. It's always fascinated me, and probably fascinated a lot of other people who've traveled up and down the road here. But I'm going to just stop real quick and take a look at it. This is one of those crazy places on French Camp Road that indicate just how old this area is. This house, look at it. It's in pretty bad shape. And it's crazy that it's been in this state of disrepair for many years. I mean, it's so bad I doubt if ghosts would inhabit it. Try to find the history of this too. These palm trees here were probably planted by the original inhabitants. But it's one spooky looking place. I'll stick my camera in here and see if I could look inside. We have a year of 2024 coming up, and have a lot of good ideas for you. Been kind of housebound lately because of the weather, but today's nice. This weekend's supposed to be really bad with the rain and such, so we sometimes are limited on what we can do due to the weather. But we'd love to have you leave us a comment. If you could also give us a thumbs up, subscribe to History Hunters as well. We would appreciate it. Thanks so much.